Hi there, folks. My name is Emily.
And I'm out.
And this is Oh My Word, a podcast where we clutch our pearls about some of the content that is in books, movies, musicals, TV shows, etc., and tell you all about it and give you our ratings and sometimes our suggestions on whether or not you should consume it. Because here's the dealio. There's some really great stuff in some media, and there's some really not great stuff. So you need someone to tell you what's in it. And there are places where you can find that information, but it's here and there and it's not really coalesced, and we're just doing our best to bring it all together and convenient for you.
Also, because from the safety of our basement that we dwell upon, within which we dwell, we have concocted a very highly scientific formula for these content rating reviews. So that's our pearl clutching formula, rating scale for violence, language, romance, everything on a scale of 0 to 4, with 0 being the best and 4 being really not best at all. Like, not even at all.
Yeah, I really liked how you changed your sentence around to say the basement within which we reside, though I did learn several years ago that in fact in English we can put prepositions at the end of sentences despite what your teachers may or may not have told you, because our language is Germanic and not a Romance language, and therefore prepositions at the end are actually okay.
I actually put prepositions at the end of sentences all the time, and then sometimes other non-writers might call me out on it, and I'll be like, well, I'm a writer, I can do whatever I want. Which I don't think is the way it's supposed to go, but you learn the rules so you can break the rules. But speaking of things the English teachers always taught that were wrong, it was always using the Emily and I, which is not always correct. And I've heard from like people on the news or stuff like that, or people in interviews using the and I when it's not correct to use it. Because sometimes and me is correct. It's not always I. You have to take out the second name, and then you see, would you say me or I, and that's how you know which one to use, right? So it'd be Emily and I are recording a podcast, but it would be like Emily and me are. Now I have to think about it, but it's common to use the me.
Yes, Emily and me you would usually think of as an object. So like the ball hit Emily and me. However, I learned recently that even that which we've learned, which is Emily and I, would be the subject, and Emily and me would be the object. In fact, you could say Emily and me are going to the store. And I don't remember.
Why? Because you wouldn't say me is going to the store. You say I am going to the store.
I know. That's what we've always been taught. But I was listening to someone recently who was a university professor who was saying that explanation was from some like random school teacher 50 years ago, and it makes sense, but technically it's not actually based on anything.
Oh, maybe just because it was an easier rule to follow. If you give people like a one-line rule to follow, it's much easier than like having to explain when the exceptions and not. The point is, and I is not always correct, so don't always refer to it because it's not necessarily correct.
And you know another pet peeve? When people say myself incorrectly. Because myself is reflexive. So I hit myself is correct. But when people try to say myself and the other staff will check to make sure everything is okay. No, the other staff and I will make sure everything is okay. Even the other staff and me, but not the other staff, myself. Like they're trying to sound smarter, but they actually just sound dumber.
I just don't even like how that sounds. It sounds off.
Yeah, because it is. Anyway, speaking of things that sound off, and that aren't off, but in the best way. Today we're talking about The Princess Bride. Both the movie and the book, which are both off, but in like a good, comedic, hilarious, clever way.
You know what it is? I realize it's sort of like Shrek before Shrek. Because Shrek was supposed to make fun of like the whole fairy tale stuff, even as it really filled the fairy tale stuff. But The Princess Bride, it didn't necessarily set out to make fun of all the fairy tale stuff, because I think officially, because it's written by William Goldman, and he officially, I think, did it for his daughters. He's like, okay, what story do you want me to write, or this, that, whatever. And then that's part of how they came up with this. I think that's what it is. I could have that myth part of it wrong, but I think that's what it was. Because I've actually read 2 of his autobiographies, but that was like a long time ago, so I don't remember everything. But where was it going? Oh, but this, I don't think it necessarily set out to make fun of like fairy tale tropes. It just took them and just like went zany with them, just for like the hell of it and the fun of it kind of thing. But it does it way better than Shrek. I mean, even though Shrek is so great, but like this does it way better because it's just, well, this is one of the ones where it's like, why did no one ever tell me to read the book sooner? Like, why did it take me so long to read the book?
My bad.
Yeah, I don't know. Exactly. But even though the book and the movie, they're not exactly the same, but they both hit, like you realize that the movie still hit the right notes of the book. So whatever it does or doesn't include, you're not like, oh, it's, you know, the book is so much better, blah, blah. Like, yes, it is. But the film also got the tone of it right. It got so much of it right. Yeah.
So for those of you who are living more under a rock than Elton and I are and haven't heard of The Princess Bride, basically, it's a story within a story. So while homesick in bed, a young boy's grandfather reads him the story of a farm boy turned pirate who encounters numerous obstacles, enemies, and allies in his quest to be reunited with his true love. So the fairy tale story is being told by the grandfather to the young boy. So the setup is the young boy and his grandfather, and then there's the story that he's being read.
Which is the film version. The book doesn't have that. The book is all about William Goldman is going on and on about how he wants to bring the classic tale of like S. Morgenstern to English. And it's this whole Florin thing. He goes on and on about this country of Florin and like their great writer. And he like inserts himself into the story of like, I don't know why Morgenstern does like 15 pages about trees here, but I think he was upset about the trees they chopped down around his house, blah, blah, blah. And it's just, you come to a certain point because there's this whole point about Buttercup's baby, whatever, this whole thing, and about how he met with Stephen King, but Stephen King is going to do the translation and not him. And for a moment, you're like, did they meet? Like, you actually think it's real for a second because of the way he just, it just all seems real. It's amazing.
That's right. I remember, I haven't read the book in at least 10 years, so I don't really remember it well, but now that you mention it, I can vaguely recall not being quite sure what was real and what was fiction. In a good way. Like when the author breaks the fourth wall and speaks directly to the reader and you can't really tell what's real and what's not.
Yeah. I went to check his biography because I was like, wait a second. All these things he's writing here, I don't think it's true. I don't think he had a son. I don't think whatever. So I went to like recheck his biography to see, that's not how I remember this book coming about. It's like, he did such a great job. Such a great job on this. Yeah.
Maybe I'll have to read it again.
Absolutely.
So for our scales are based mostly on the movie version, correct? For our pearl clutching ratings?
Yeah, well, anything that went up is because the film version might have ticked it up, because the book version is pretty clean.
Yeah. So we gave it violence, it's a 2, language is a 2, and romance is a 1.5, even though the whole thing is a romance story, but it's a fairy tale, so what can you expect? And they don't really do much more than kiss. So in that sense, the 1.5 is appropriate. Violence, there's swashbuckling and sword fighting. So it's not really gory, but people are definitely doing fighting.
And the guy gets poisoned.
Oh, right. So it's not like brutally violent, but it exists within a fairy tale realm. Language, okay, so here's the deal with the language. We gave it a 2. Technically, according to our ratings, it could be up because they say SOB. And on our ratings, the B word, the word that is used to describe a female dog, is an automatic 4. But we used our executive powers and our ability to think rationally about things, and we realized that using the B word as an expletive against someone, like you're such a B, is different than saying, son of a B, because it's different. One, you're saying not necessarily directed towards someone, you could say when you stub your toe or something like that happens. So we kept it at a 2, even though it has that, because it just has a different feel to it.
Well, one, I guess, is a direct attack against a female. I want to say direct attack. Right. One specifically, and then the other one is just calling out a guy, even though it does indirectly attack a female. Yeah, thanks. But also there weren't so many in this. So it's like, on the one hand, sometimes books or films get pushed all the way up from one word But in this one, it really was sparse. Like, not okay language was really, really sparse. So
yeah. And this is not necessarily a kid's movie. Like, sometimes teen movies with one F-bomb, that'll bring it up because, like, this is meant for young people and you're bumping it up. Princess Bride, I don't know that it's necessarily a kid's movie. So the fact that it has that one SOB drop doesn't bump it up because, like, the intended audience, it's a little bit more okay for.
I wonder if the film might be considered like a family movie. I'm not sure, but the book is not specifically written for kids. I mean, you could see you could see from the publishing of it that it's an adult novel that was printed. Like, it was not aimed at a younger audience. It was aimed at an older audience. So even though there's probably a lot of people who let their kids read it, and for the most part, it's probably fine. You know, I'd be curious to see how much the kids get, especially when he talks about his personal life and like that kind of stuff. But yeah. It falls into like a weird kind of... It's just its own category, The Princess Bride. How about that? It's its own category.
Yes. So the movie, by the way, is one of those, like, just so many people in it. It was directed by Rob Reiner, stars Carrie Elways, Mandy Patinkin, Robin Wright, Andre the Giant, Wallace Shawn, and a whole bunch of other people. But just that alone, like, it's a huge cast in terms of the star power, like, or the acting power. But they all just give amazing performances. Such memorable, specific performances, quotable. You know, those characters, they come to life so much.
I think this is one of Robin Wright's first films, actually. I think this was one of her first. Like, whatever, check it out. Yeah, it's true. There's almost something freeing about, like, we're going to make this ridiculous, right? There's something about it where it's just like, we're all just going to be ridiculous. So take your character and, like, go for it. But, so here's one thing about the book that they get. So even though you have this whole romance and stuff like that, there's a few lines that first I totally burst out laughing about. Like, there was one, I don't remember what it was, but something to do with somebody being jealous of someone else. And it's like, there hasn't been this kind of jealousy since, like, David was, like, jealous of his neighbor Saul's cactus or something, which is, like, arbitrary line. You're like, what is even going on here? But even, like, for example, the first time that, I don't even remember their names. Whatever the farm boy is, and Buttercup, well, the Dread Pirate Roberts, who's not, who is, but he isn't, whatever. So him and Buttercup, like, the first time they kiss before he has to go away and make a name for himself or whatever he's doing, it doesn't describe the kiss. It just says, like, there's been 5 great kisses in the history of the world, you know, and there's different ways to grade it, blah, 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 blah. But this one outdid them all. Like, and that's it. And it's like, okay, we see exactly what you're doing here with the romance. We get exactly what you're trying to say here. And you didn't have to give us these, like, the moonlight, blah, blah, blah. And she felt like she was flying and all the kind of stuff that people go on for paragraphs and paragraphs. Which, obviously, being me, I don't like. But it's just more effective in a way. It's like a different kind of, it's a different way of just being so effective at saying things. So, that's, yeah. There's also, like, there's some so ridiculous things. Like, the first time, Wesley! I can't believe I couldn't remember everything. So in Wesley, when he's chasing after, so Buttercup is kidnapped and he's chasing after them, and he faces Inigo. My name is Inigo Montoya, right? So he has to face him up at the top of the cliffs, right? It's all about, like, Inigo standing like, can you please get up the cliff already so I can kill you? Like, instead of him just, like, so they get up and they start the sword fight, right? Because Inigo's like this expert master sword fighter. And no one's even close to his skill and da-da-da. So they're fighting each other. And there seems a point where, like, okay, the battle's almost going to be won. Then Inigo's like, just kidding, I've been fighting with my left hand, but really I'm right-handed. And he switches the sword, fighting. And the pirate's like, you thought I was left-handed, but I'm also right-handed. Okay, fighting. Everything is just so ridiculous about it. It's so ridiculous. Yeah. And that's why it's so much fun, because it's just so ridiculous.
Yeah. I know, it has almost like it's one of those movies that you just, if you haven't seen it, people look at you like, what? You haven't seen The Princess Bride? It's like you get your friends together and you all sit and watch it and you laugh and you quote it and you watch it again and again. It just is one of those, not quite a cult classic, because it's not quite as weird as some cult classics, but, like, it's almost in that realm, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, you have to watch it, and people quote it, and there are bits of it, like, we have a neighbor whose dog is named Inigo Montoya. Like, it's just one of those movies, you know, that people are so enraptured by which many people are enraptured.
There you go. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. Well, it's so much fun, and it's also also through reading the book, it's great to see just the cleverness of it. Because the film is less about I think the film is less about the cleverness and more about just the fun of it. I think that comes across much more in the film. I mean, you could still appreciate some, but it's just more about the fun, the ridiculousness. You know, the inconceivable, like all that. It's just more about just like the craziness of it. But the book, even though you still have all those elements in it, it's just so clever how William Goldman is actually getting you to say, wait a second, is this real? Like, you know Florin is not a country, but you still have this moment of like, where is Florin located? Because he's like, Stephen King, his ancestors came from Florin, and he's like telling me, Bill, did you ever go there? Blah, blah, blah. So I made sure to go to Florin. And there's a university professor who's like an expert in Florin. And you're like, what is going on here? How come I've never heard of this country before? It's so well done. It's really, as a viewer and a writer, I very much appreciate it.
And of course, we can't leave off a discussion about The Princess Bride without discussing the ROUSs, which are the rodents of unusual size, which they encounter when they go into the forest. I don't remember, like the fire forest or something. Oh, yeah. And that's something like every once in a while, I've seen the movie somewhat recently, maybe in like college. I haven't seen it with my family since I was, I don't know, like 10 or something like that. And ROUS still comes up every once in a while. Like, that's just what staying power it, and other parts of the movie too, have, that even years later, after seeing the movie with my family, that can still come up in conversation because it's just so iconic and hilarious. Or you think the poison that I have, you would think that the poison is in the drink in front of me, not in front of you, so you'd switch them. But really, then you would know that I would think that way, and like on and on and on. It's just so good. I really want to watch it again.
Yeah, well, yeah. And it's also, I think part of, because it's so ridiculous and stuff like that, any of the special effects, like, it doesn't matter that they're dated almost, because the whole film is just supposed to be so crazy. It's like, it's hard. It's difficult sometimes to watch. Like, I was watching something once where the guy shoots at a screen and the screen actually explodes before he shoots it, because that's how bad the CGI was then, even though that was something popular when it came out, but the CGI was so terrible that it literally exploded before he shot it. And you're like, did no one catch this? So like here, even if like that would happen, you'd almost think it was part of the story for it to be like that. Like, that's also, I wonder if that contributes to the staying power of it, that like, because everything is just supposed to be so fun and ridiculous, like it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter.
That it's so dated.
Yeah. Because it's like is and it isn't at the same time. Yeah. And it has Peter Falk in it. We should just add that. Even though he's not, he's just reading the story, but he's a fabulous actor, so we should pay tribute to him. The end.
Oh, well, I guess that means we're at the end of the episode. She said the end, and you have to listen to Elt. Yeah. So enjoy The Princess Bride book and movie, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers, everyone. Oh My Word podcast is brought to you by the pearl-clutching basement dwellers at Oh My Word. Follow us on Instagram for updates at Oh My Word Podcast, or like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For full episode notes and detail, visit eltenenbaum.com. Music is by Tim Berg. See you next time.